Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we thought we would dive right into something that certainly surrounds us, especially in our news and especially surrounding us as far as our environment, and that is all the negative stories that we hear about inner city decay. And the question is, what are the governors and the city mayors that are in these cities that are decaying doing about it? It seems to be a problem that's been going on for decades. And after 50 years of failed governmental attempts to improve inner cities, we're going to be talking about a couple of characters in a new book that choose a private development as the mechanism to institute change. This project they dubbed A Hand Up has an ambitious vision. It's to transform the inner cities that are beset with urban blight into safe, vital municipalities with great schools, thriving businesses, and other options for recreation. Our guest today is the author of the book, who had worked for General Motors for 32 years. With his educational background in mechanical engineering and business, he provided a practical experience in facilitating engineering and industrial relations, corporate strategic planning, and manufacturing management, along with his expertise in change management, which lent authenticity to his book, A Hand Up. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book, A Hand Up, Martin Laurent. Martin, thank you for being on the program today.
Why, thank you for having me. I've looked forward to this.
Well, this is one of those things, when you start digging deeper into what's going on with our government, you just become irritated, especially when you look at cities, for instance, like Baltimore. I mean, here you see how this particular city has been run for, 20-plus years by one particular governor, and it's just in tremendous decay, and they've certainly had plenty of money going that direction. So I just have to ask you, as you decided to write this, what was your experience about all this?
Well, this is the third novel in a series about two politicians who decide, a Democrat from New York State, Rochester, New York, and a Republican from Lincoln, Nebraska, and they decide that collaboration is a better model for improving the nation than fighting with one another all the time. And that inspiration came from back in the day when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, two people of very diametrically opposed ideals, worked closely together to solve a lot of the nation's problems. So I took that idea and started running with it. If they decided that collaboration was a model, that certainly wouldn't change society, and they would face all kinds of problems in trying to transform various social ills. In this book, A Hand Up, they take on the city of Baltimore, which has certainly, like many, many big cities, fallen on very hard times. When I started doing the research for the book, the city of Baltimore had more murders with 600,000 people than the city of New York. So it really is in desperate need of change. And housing and urban development started in the 60s. And it has plowed money into cities all across the country, and they haven't changed. Or we get temporary change. Or the third alternative that sometimes we see is what happens is called gentrification. The structure around people changes, and it becomes better, but the people who live there then can't afford to live there anymore, and they have to move to lesser areas again. So although the area has been improved, the situation for the people hasn't improved. And I think there are ways that could be employed to change that.
Well, the funny thing is, and I know that your book is certainly laden with a lot of common sense. I mean, we've got people who are going in government that swore to protect and to serve and to defend the Constitution. And we can certainly see evidence, especially this year, that that's the biggest load of baloney that we've ever heard. And it's very frustrating and angering to see these guys all bickering, making the kind of salaries they make, and nothing's getting done, and people are actually suffering at the end. And you have to come to take a look at this, because I know you had to write this book in fiction form because it might have been very difficult to address what seems to be very complex issues about all this. So how did you go about tackling this as you went to write the story?
You raise a really interesting point. We are a nation that is so divided that I decided if you want to talk to people, all people, it had to be through fiction. If you get into nonfiction, then you're going to appeal to a group of Democrats who have a legitimate point of view in their mind, or you're going to appeal to Republicans who have an equally legitimate point of view in their mind. But you can't talk to both of them. Our society just doesn't allow it. So that's how I came to politicians from time to time have worked collaboratively. What if two people didn't put their partisanship aside and really started attacking a problem? Could they solve it? And of course, a big part of the book is the status quo. Other politicians, money, power, they don't want change. They're perfectly happy with things as bad as they are. So there is a major push against what is common sense reform.
And that's the funny part about it, is the idea of common sense. You can see how the problem can be solved because you know what the problem is. And it seems like a linear process, but you put people in the mix and it changes everything, doesn't it?
It surely does. It, for one thing, we have the problem of racism, and we're certainly seeing that play out in the country everywhere right now. And whether systemic racism is the big issue or not, if you are going to improve an inner city, you have to make it safe, and you have to provide good education. And those two basics are necessary for any area to be an area in which people want to live. And somehow, in our current political process to change a city, we don't get that done. Neither one of them.
Well, here's a big thing. Education is always at the forefront, it seems, especially when it comes to inner city development. And then you get the teachers' unions that are right there just like a dog waiting to be fed outside of a door, to say, well, we support this president because they believe in great education. You get a few $1 billion or better each year, it seems like, that goes into education. And what you have is a large swamp known as the teachers' union that's standing there with its bureaucracy sucking all the money up, and the schools don't get anything in the end. I mean, you can see the problems right there. It's like, how do you change it? It's like this with this COVID. The teachers said, well, we're not going to go back to work. We want to get paid, but we don't want to go back to work. And it's like, really? And I kind of really appreciated our president saying, well, then I'm going to make sure the money goes to the kids, because that's who this is about, correct?
Right.
So anyway, I'd like you to kind of elaborate on that if you could.
Well, it's I agree with everything that you say, and teachers certainly have a right to be in a union. I don't argue that, but the
union becomes the problem.
But we have all kinds of people who have to go to work every day. They have jobs in government, in grocery stores, wherever they work, and they are having to go to work. They want their children in school, and the teachers don't feel safe. Well, you have to agree, it isn't as safe today as it was last year, but that's a fact. And we have to take what precautions we can, but certainly the evidence, the scientific evidence, is that children under the age of 18, more children under 18 have died from flu than have died from COVID. So that population isn't as much at risk. We need to take precautions with the teachers, and we need to get about educating our children. We can't go a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is, and not educate the children.
Now, you talk about two people from different parties in your book. Let's first of all talk about who these characters are, what their backgrounds are, realizing that they are coming into this situation that's very daunting, and what they bring to it, especially their optimism and how they begin to see things evolve.
Okay, the Republican from Nebraska he started a small company as an entrepreneur in college, and the company grew. So he's a manufacturing type, and he experienced in the first book an OSHA inspection that he just thought was ridiculous, and that made him decide that he had to go and do something to change government. The other character was from Rochester, New York, and he was in public relations, and he got to working with a senator from the state of New York, fictional senator, and this senator was concerned with his image and wanted to construct an image based on having made certain accomplishments. And as they worked together, it became clear to this PR representative that the senator was interested in selling the image, but he wasn't at all interested in accomplishing any of the things that he talked about. And that's one of the things that I think you find our politicians, as I like to call them, are immortal. Whether they're Republicans or Democrats, once you are elected to a national office, your chances of being reelected and reelected are very, very high. There are a few states, and Arizona is one of them, where you do have some switch back and forth from Republican to Democrat, but in general, state to state is pretty much a red state or a blue state. And because these politicians are reelected by making big promises and not following through, it's to their advantage to make big promises and not follow through. And that's what they do. So these two meet and decide that they are there to make a difference and start making a difference.
It's just amazing that that people will go into something like that and you realize that we need to start changing a lot of the rules. I myself have thought to myself, first of all, family running for government, depending on the branch, we should start setting, for instance, we always hear about term limits. Well, everybody's always talking about that, but it never happens. You always talk about balancing budgets, for instance, and the thing is, well, when we reduce the budget, that means money that I used to have for whatever my project was isn't coming in anymore, or at least if it isn't getting used, then they reduce the amount that's being given. And there's just a lot of things to look at, executive orders from presidents. So you take a look at Barack Obama, he had some 1,700 executive orders. Most people didn't know what most of those were, but certainly a lot of them didn't have much to do with helping the citizens of the United States for the most part. You take a look at, for instance, the big thing we're tackling now about judiciary, the balance of where law applies. Well, what's good for them is good for them, but not good for us kind of a situation. And, you take a look at all this and think, where do we start? These guys must have, in this story, thought to themselves, oh my God, where do we actually start? And the only thing I can suggest is start with what's in front of you and just take one thing at a time, I guess.
Absolutely. And as you suggest, the rules work against real reform. One of the things that evolves in the first two books is a constitutional crisis and a convention of the states to amend the Constitution, and 5 amendments emerge. One to balance the budget, one on term limits, one to limit the judiciary, one to limit the executive branch, and then the third to augment the power of the legislature. In order to amend the Constitution, you need 3/4 of the states, and 3/4 of the states are not conservative or liberal. So you have to have a broad appeal to both sides. And one of the things that, from a liberal point of view, you can't get done is the social legislation that they think is necessary, and perhaps is necessary in some of these large cities, because the Constitution doesn't allow it. So perhaps a way around that, instead of amending the Constitution each time, which is a cumbersome process, in my research for the book, the 27th Amendment, I believe, it deals with pay of the members of Congress. They cannot vote for a pay increase during the session in which they were elected. That was a part of the Bill of Rights. It was introduced in 1790 and passed in 1992. Took 190 some years for it to be ratified. So amending the Constitution can be a bit cumbersome. So in areas of social legislation, which is important to liberals who make up about 1/4 of us, if we had it so that the legislature had to go through a process with a supermajority, that might have appeal to liberals. And if we are going to successfully change how we govern and get toward collaboration, we've got to offer something to both sides.
It's pretty astonishing when you take a look at our governing body now and you wonder how many, for instance, governors really know what the Constitution is. Everybody seems to know what the First and Second Amendment is, but generally when you get beyond that, it pretty much falls. We recently had a guest on our program who loves teaching about what the Constitution is. He actually offers workshops and classes out of Texas. And it was pretty funny because he talks about, for instance, when he has encounters with police, law enforcement. Say you're out there driving around, you get pulled over by a police officer. And it's funny because he says, here's how he goes about this, is the officer will ask him for his ID, which he doesn't carry one, because by law you're not actually required to, at least constitutional law. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you show me your ID so that I know who you are? And the officer usually stands there bewildered. And he says, you appear to be a police officer, and that even gets them even more confused about things. He says, look, my gun or whatever, and my badge are all the ID that I need. He says, no, you actually need to show me your identification so that I can be sure that you're actually an officer of the law. He says, well, I am an officer of the law. And I says, okay, well, let me ask you this question. Did you swear on an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America? And he says, well, yes, I did. So you know what the Constitution is? Yes, I do. He says, then tell me how many articles are in the Constitution. And he says, generally what happens, at least nowadays, is the officer says, you know, sir, why don't you just go ahead and go about your business and have a nice day? You know, and one of the biggest things, especially when you take a look at the political climate this year, is it becomes disgusting when you see people, for instance, like Nancy Pelosi, talking about how she's going to expunge the president of the United States. I mean, literally, they're blatantly being treasonous, you know, and that, for instance, she's going to invoke the 25th Amendment. So let's go ahead and talk about something like that. You know, that these are supposed to be our leaders of the nation, but yet you kind of wonder, do you really know anything about the Constitution? Because you're certainly not carrying out your oath of office.
Well, a hand up, interestingly, has a large section, a large part of the plot is an attempt to remove the speaker and the president from their offices. This is a fictional tale, so in part they look into assassinating the president and the speaker and then they also look at other means, and one of the means is the 25th Amendment. And I think readers would really find this fascinating, particularly if we should see for the former vice president elected. His mental capacity has been challenged, and also now there is a challenge, whether substantiated or not, about corruption with Ukraine and so forth. Well, the 25th Amendment could be used. I don't know whether that's legitimate or not, but the 25th Amendment has 4 sections. The first section is that if the president dies in office, the vice president becomes president. Prior to that, strangely enough, the president became acting president, which John Tyler found offensive. When Harrison died, he said, "I'm not acting president, I'm president." And the second part is a vice presidential absence is filled by the president and then confirmed by a majority of both House and Senate. The third part is that the president can submit a letter to the Speaker and the President pro tem of the Senate, currently Senator Grassley, and say that he will be incapacitated for a period of time, and the vice president becomes acting president. The fourth section says that the vice president and the heads of the executive agencies can submit a letter to the Speaker and the President pro tem of the Senate saying that the president is unable to perform the duties of the presidency. And unable to perform that's the statement. It doesn't say unable because of an incapacity or further define it. Recently, Speaker Pelosi wants to appoint a commission to determine whether some president is unable, and I think that's the political ploy to hide behind. The second step then is if the president says, no, I'm not unable to perform, the president submits a letter. And then if the vice president submits a second letter, the vice president remains president for a period of 21 days or up to 21 days. And 2/3 of both houses must decide that the president is unable to perform. So it's actually a higher bar than impeachment, which only requires 2/3 of the Senate to remove a president. The 25th Amendment requires 2/3 of both houses if the president says, no, I am not unable to perform. And it is an interesting part of the book that readers are really enjoying. I think that alone is a reason to buy this book.
Well, and I agree with you, and I think the other reason that's important too is because a lot of us, and this has been for a few generations, we've gotten away from government understanding its functionality and responsibilities to the citizens, to a point that because it remained unchecked, you see the kind of gross misconduct that's going on. And it even spreads to things like you wouldn't expect, like, for instance, our media. I mean, goodness gracious, this has got to be some of the most imbalanced, sloppy media that I've seen in decades, really, this day and age. And you realize how important something like the Constitution really is for a society to function the way our founding fathers seen it, which guaranteed freedoms, but at the same time, it didn't guarantee that it would be easy. And it's as a result of that people go, well, I'd rather just go about my day, going and doing my job, coming home and letting cable TV wash over me and enjoy the occasional family picnic or vacation, while, basically the foxes are let loose in the hen house. And then all of a sudden you realize before you know it, you wake up one morning and all these rights that you believed you had were stripped away. And why is that? Because you believe the people that we elected into office were going to do what you do, which is to do your job that you're paid to do. And it gets pretty ugly pretty fast, doesn't it?
It really does. And the media in all three of my books is one of the villains. It is very unfortunate, in my opinion, that media takes a point of view and is no longer curious. It is a part of selling, this is the path that we should be on, rather than asking what is good and what is bad about a proposal from either side. And certainly I think that slanting news and misrepresenting news is a really large problem that we have right now, and extremely unfortunate. One of the things that I came across in research, there was a man by the name of Walter Lippmann, who is still taught in journalism schools today. And one of the things that he espoused was that truth is only important in a news story if it advances the narrative. And that, when I read that, I just, wow.
Right.
That doesn't seem logical to me, but it's one of the things that apparently is taught, so it's unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, too, because the news should be in pursuit and exposing the truth, which is supported by facts. And when you take a look at, for instance, this whole COVID coronavirus thing, you keep hearing everybody spewing about science, and yet, as I've consistently told people, I haven't seen any scientific method whatsoever since this whole thing started. And they get confused, like, well, no, doctors. I said, doctors aren't science. Science is the actual action of what doctors are supposed to do. For instance, if they want to explore cancer, you explore what is the origin of cancer, what helps it thrive and grow, what is the way by removing these mechanisms does it destroy itself. And what's funny is we've had many guests on the program with backgrounds like yourself. To give you an idea, we had a gentleman on some years back who actually wrote a book on how he reversed his mother's emphysema. Now, this was a woman that was in her 70s, and he managed to reverse stage 4, a woman who's carrying around an oxygen bottle, to a point that she could actually go on long walks without it, and it was reversed. And he was an engineer. He just looked at the mechanisms and, like an engineer, follows in pursuit of the truth of how things work based in facts. And you can see why your 3 books about what we're talking about here today would be good for people, because you approach it that way, in as much as describing, what Constitution means, things like that. And I think that's probably why people are picking up your books, is because they say, I didn't get an opportunity to see this in action and what that actually means when it's in play. And I'm sure that's probably what's made your books popular, correct?
Well, I think so. One of the things that I set out to do is to write entertaining stories. They are not some, and there's nothing wrong with a treatise on the Constitution or educating oneself about these matters. But this is fiction, and it's meant to be enjoyable. It's a continuing story. The characters are fun, and the situations are entertaining, I'll say.
Human.
And underlying that, there are some just real basic truths of looking at problems, and if we really wanted to solve them, it's not. For instance, in the city of Baltimore, if you want it to be safe and if you want good education, those are 2 easy things to say, and it's a generational problem. If you make all the schools there excellent tomorrow morning, the children that are very young will adapt very quickly, but the children in the 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th grade, they have a lot of catching up to do, and they certainly can do it. But these are not trivial concerns, but if you take them on, they can be resolved. It's just sitting and saying, well, isn't it awful? And their ancestors were slaves, therefore they're victims, and we can't do anything for them. Well, that's sort of self-defeating and leads nowhere. Leads where we are, which is a fairly awful place.
Well, it was a big project you tackled, and certainly one that's worthy of not only discussion but certainly action. And the best way that people can begin taking action, first of all, is to know the essence of the problem, not just what the problem seems to be on an emotional level, but on a realistic fact level. Is there a place, a website people can go to find out about your work, how they can get the books, things like that?
Yes, there is. Thank you. It is martylaurent.com, MartyLaurent.com, and all 3 books are there. They can also go to Amazon, and the books are there. You search under Martin Laurent, A Hand Up, Martin Laurent, The Third Bounce, and Martin Laurent, Pray for Rain. Those are the 3 books, and they are available both in Kindle version and in paperback.
Well, very good. Martin, I want to first of all thank you for taking the time to be on the program today and inspiring with hope, like you said, and through your books, people will come to understand a lot of things as they reveal themselves in the essence of the human experience, and that's what really a lot of this is about, and just getting people to make better decisions and to take action. I know that when I talk politics with people, people are surprised because they say, well, my mom and dad said the 2 things you never talk to anybody about is politics and religion. And I said, well, that's for the ignorant. Let's see if we can just give this a shot here. And they get surprised how they can actually talk about it, because I'll say, for instance, what do you think the biggest problem of our current president and administration is? And they'll say, well, this, this, and this. And then they'll say, then what are you doing about it? And that changes the conversation very quickly.
Right.
Because it is up to you, not them, but you, to do something about it. And that's what I like about what you've written, is it shows action like, well, I didn't think about it that way before, you know. And that's what's really important, is to become enlightened that way, so you can transcend what you see in front of you.
That's exactly right. If we, all of us, if we want things changed, they aren't going to change anything. We have to step up, and if we want better education in our schools, it isn't a function of federal government, state government, or local government. We have to go to our school and influence it. And that's how we make change.
Absolutely. Martin, thank you again for being on the program today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Well, I thank you for inviting me. I very much enjoyed it.
Glad to hear it. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thanks for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.